Grief research has changed dramatically over the last few decades. One of its clearest findings lines up almost exactly with something Epictetus taught 2,000 years ago. This happened long before anyone studied loss scientifically at all. For most of the 20th century, psychology assumed grief followed a fixed sequence of stages. That sequence supposedly ended in a clean resolution called acceptance. Newer research complicates that picture considerably in several ways. Grief does not reliably move in straight lines at all. It moves in waves instead, resurfacing unpredictably. Sometimes it returns years after a loss, triggered by something as small as a familiar smell or a specific date on a calendar. This finding alone reshaped how clinicians think about healthy grieving entirely. One influential modern model is called continuing bonds theory. It found something researchers did not initially expect. People who maintained an ongoing relationship with a deceased loved one often showed better long-term adjustment. This happened through memory, ritual, or internal dialogue, compared to people who tried to fully detach and move on. This directly challenged an older assumption. Healthy grieving was assumed to require severing the emotional bond completely. Epictetus addressed exactly this tension. He simply used the language of philosophy rather than clinical psychology. He taught that we should hold everything we love the way we hold a piece of pottery. We should be aware from the start that it is fragile and could break. He was explicit about one thing. This awareness should not stop a person from loving fully. It should simply prevent an illusion. Nothing we love was ever permanently guaranteed to remain. This distinction turns out to matter enormously in grief research today specifically. Studies on complicated grief often find a specific belief underneath it. Complicated grief is the form that fails to ease over time and significantly impairs daily functioning. Many people experiencing complicated grief held an unconscious assumption. They believed the relationship, or the person, was permanent in a way nothing in reality actually is. When that assumption shatters, the grief carries an additional layer. It adds a kind of shock at the fact that permanence was never real to begin with. Epictetus was not arguing against attachment or love at all. He was arguing against one specific hidden belief. That belief holds that what we love is exempt from the basic conditions governing everything else that exists. He wrote that when you kiss your child goodnight, you should silently acknowledge that they are mortal. This is not to invite despair. It prevents the false sense that their presence was ever owed to you, rather than given. Modern grief researchers describe something remarkably similar. They call it Assumptive World Theory. Every person carries unconscious assumptions about how the world works. One of them is the assumption that people we love will remain available indefinitely. Loss shatters this assumption abruptly. Much of the disorientation following a death comes not just from missing the person. It also comes from the collapse of an entire framework the mind had been quietly relying on. There is a specific practical difference between Epictetus's advice and simple detachment. It is worth stating clearly, he never suggested loving less. He never suggested holding back affection to avoid future pain either. He suggested holding the awareness of impermanence alongside the love itself, simultaneously. This beats pushing that awareness away until loss forces it upon you all at once. Clinicians today sometimes call this anticipatory processing. It appears to soften, though never eliminate, the disorientation that follows an eventual loss. Grief researchers studying resilience after loss found another detail. Epictetus would have recognized it immediately. People who continued finding meaning through ongoing connection adjusted better over time. This included visiting a grave, keeping a ritual, or speaking to the deceased internally, compared to people who treated any continued bond as unhealthy attachment. The goal was never erasing the relationship at all. It was integrating the loss into an ongoing, evolving relationship with memory itself instead. None of this makes loss painless. Neither Epictetus nor modern grief researchers ever claimed it could. The pain of losing someone deeply loved is not a malfunction. It is not something to be corrected. It is the accurate, appropriate cost of having loved someone real in the first place. What both traditions point toward is narrower than painlessness. It is also more honest. They point toward grieving without an added, unnecessary shock. That shock comes from having believed quietly and mistakenly, that the person was never actually mortal to begin with. Epictetus lost people he loved, the same as anyone else. He lived in an era of considerably higher mortality than our own. He was not writing from any theoretical distance. He was writing from inside the same fragile arrangement everyone lives within. He tried to describe a way of loving fully, while staying honest about what love eventually requires each of us to face. Consider two people who each lose a parent around the same age under similar circumstances. One had quietly assumed, without ever examining it directly, that their parent would simply always be reachable. It felt like they would always be just a phone call away, indefinitely. The other had, at some point, consciously acknowledged the parent's mortality. Not obsessively, but as an occasional, honest thought held alongside ordinary love and daily life. Both people experience real, appropriate grief when the loss actually happens. Only one of them also experiences something extra. That extra thing is the specific shock of a shattered assumption they never knew they were carrying. This is not a minor difference in outcome at all. Grief researchers measuring complicated versus uncomplicated grief consistently find something clear. This shattered assumption effect adds measurable distress beyond the loss itself. It sometimes lasts far longer than the grief connected to the loss alone. The mind, in these cases, is not just mourning a person alone. It is also mourning the collapse of a belief. It did not realize it was relying on that belief until the moment it failed. Epictetus offered a specific mental exercise for this exact situation. Modern therapists sometimes recreate it almost word for word. He suggested briefly imagining something specific while embracing someone you love. This particular moment could be the last one. This is not meant with dread and not as a performance of gratitude. It is simply an accurate acknowledgement of what is actually true in every single moment with anyone we love. Practiced this way, the exercise does not diminish love at all. Research on similar modern techniques suggests something encouraging. It often deepens present moment attention toward the person still very much here in front of you. There is a reasonable objection worth addressing directly. Some people worry that dwelling on mortality, even briefly, invites anxiety rather than presence. The distinction seems to lie in frequency and framing. A single, calm acknowledgement differs sharply from repeated, anxious rehearsal of loss, which functions more like the rumination researchers warn against in other contexts entirely. Epictetus was describing a brief, clear-eyed glance at reality, not an extended, fearful dwelling on it. The two produce measurably different outcomes, both in ancient philosophy and in the clinical research examining this same territory today. What emerges from combining both traditions is not a formula for avoiding grief, since no such formula exists or has ever existed. It is a way of grieving that carries one less layer of unnecessary shock, because the fragility of what we love was acknowledged honestly all along, quietly, alongside the loving itself, rather than discovered all at once in the worst possible moment.